Number 1. The Cornfields. I don't know if anyone has ever told a story like this before, but I feel like I need to tell it. I'm only giving you permission to read this story, anonymously. I'm also deleting my email account, so don't reply to it. I don't want people to know who I am. I was driving in my pickup truck pretty late at night. I was driving through the town, and it was raining pretty hard. When I got to the edge of town, I noticed a young man walking in the rain. I considered offering him a ride. I know that he was soaked and would get my truck really wet, but I felt compelled to give him a ride. I pulled over and rolled down the window. "Where you off to, buddy?" I asked him. He came up to the window on the passenger side. "I need to get back to NIU," he said. "I was out here at a bar with some friends, but we got into a fight and they left me here." "It's a long way to campus, buddy," I told him. "Jump in and I'll give you a ride. You might catch your death walking and soaked in the rain like you are." So we got into the truck. I began driving out of town. If you are familiar with DeKalb County in Illinois, you would know that NIU is surrounded by cornfields. So we went driving through the road, through the cornfields. The boy told me that his name was Jack. I'm not completely sure that I believed it, though. When he told me, he had paused, and seemed a little awkward when he told me. That automatically made me very suspicious of him. I wondered if I'd made a mistake by picking him up. I have heard a lot of stories about hitchhikers doing bad things, but he wasn't actually a hitchhiker. I was the one who offered him the ride. I asked him to tell me about his school, and he went ahead and did that. Although he didn't go into any details, and it was still slightly awkward being with him. I really couldn't tell what it was, but there was just something that was bugging me about him. I didn't really think that I might possibly be in danger, but I'd be lying if I said I wasn't a bit nervous in his presence. Fortunately, he was much smaller than me, and unless he had a weapon, I didn't think that I really had anything to worry about. I decided I knew what I had to do, and honestly it was something that I was planning on doing since before I picked him up anyway. As I was driving toward the school, I decided to suddenly take a turn onto a side road. It wouldn't take us toward the school, but just further out to the cornfields surrounding the area. "Hey, what are you doing?" he asked me. "This way won't get me back to school. You have to keep following the route." "There's something I think you should see," I told him. I chuckled a little, under my breath, thinking about how easily this has gone so far. "Well, I don't want to see anything," he told me. "Could you please just take me back to school? Or let me out so I can walk back? I really need to get back to campus." I ignored his request. "Do you know how big these cornfields are? They go on, and I think someone could probably get lost in them," I told him. "I bet people have gotten lost in the cornfields many, many times." I could tell that he was beginning to get nervous. He was fidgeting, and the look of fear was pretty clear on his face. "Look, I don't know much about cornfields, or anything like that," he told me. "I just need to get back to school." I decided it was time to do it. It was time to show him why I had picked him up, and it wasn't because I wanted to be nice and take him back to school. I did this, as I had done several times before, because I enjoyed it. I reached into my jacket, and I pulled out my big, sharp hunting knife. The moment I did, I could see the outright terror in Jack's eyes. That terror was like crack to me. I loved seeing it on the face of some kid, especially one who thought I was doing a good deed. Please don't hurt me, Jack begged, scared out of his mind. I just want to get back to school. I mean, if you let me out, I will walk the rest of the way back. Just please, don't hurt or kill me. I began jabbing the knife in his direction, simply to see his reaction. I had no intention on stabbing him, but he didn't know that. He didn't even try to fight back. He just kept trying to avoid the knife, and he did it very well. But the best part was how he was whining and begging me not to hurt him. It was fun, and I kept it up for as long as I could. Finally, when I'd had enough, I decided to end the encounter. I stopped the truck by the side of the road. I made him think I was going to stab him again, and he was able to open the door and get out of the truck. I got out too, pretending like I was going after him. He was so scared. He ran out into the cornfields, crying and screaming for help. The whole time, I didn't go after him. He would keep running and hiding, thinking that I had gone after him. I was okay with thinking that. With a smile on my face, I got back into my truck and I drove off, thinking about the harrowing night Jack had, and the harrowing night that was ahead of him. I was quite happy with myself. That turned out to be a very fun night for me. Number 2. Fishing. I have a pretty small motorboat that I take out onto the river for fishing. It's not a very fast boat because it doesn't have to be in order just to fish. Fishing was my favorite thing to do, and I always liked doing it alone. There were also times when I would do it late into the evening and spend the night out on the river. It was just what I found to be entertaining. This was a late summer day when I went out to fish. It was around the time when there were less boats on the water because people were tired of it, or because maybe it was not hot enough for them to be out on the water. When it got dark, it got a little cold, and that could be quite overwhelming for some. Anyway, there weren't many boats out, and when the sun began setting, there were absolutely no boats out. I decided I wanted to keep myself out on the river because I liked the solitude. It was really nice. Right when it was getting dark, I was moving down the river. I was going toward a part of the river that was a little slimmer, shore to shore. Even though I was alone, I'd been getting weird feelings that someone was watching me. Due to the weather drop, a foggy mist began forming on the river, and it was quite an eerie thing to experience. It increased that creepy feeling that I was being watched. I kept looking to the shores, which were littered with trees and shrubbery. I kept expecting to see someone standing there, but as the sun was still going down, I didn't see anything. I thought it was all in my head. I mean, it was a creepy atmosphere that I was in. It was probably playing tricks on my mind. Finally, when it was dark, I began to feel a little more creeped out. But at that point, I couldn't see anything on shore unless I used my spotlight on it. It was dark for a little before something did finally catch my eye. There was a flicker of light on the right shore. It wasn't like a firefly or anything like that, though. When I looked over at it, it was clearly a flashlight, and someone was flicking it on and off, pointed right over at me. Before I even had a chance to be worried, however, I caught another flashlight flickering on the other side of the river. Looking over there, I noticed that there was a couple lights flicking on and off. My anxiety began to rise very highly. I took my spotlight and shined it over where I saw the lights flickering. I noticed more than one person moving along the side of the shore. They were hiding behind trees while they were flicking their lights at me. I couldn't tell much about them, but they were all wearing camo for some reason. But they were definitely flicking the lights at me. Looking on the other shore, I noticed the same thing, and at this point I began to get really scared. As I was going down the river, they were trying to do their best to keep pace with me. Whatever they were up to, I couldn't imagine it would be good. It was so creepy. All I wanted to do was get going. My boat wasn't fast, but I could definitely go faster than I had been going. I put the boat up to full speed, doing my best to get back to the dock that my truck was at as quickly as possible. At first, the lights on the shores kept following me. They were definitely focused on me for some reason. I didn't want to ever find out that reason. My boat may not have been fast, but it was easier for me going down the river than it was for them to walk alongside the river. Still, there were a lot of flashlights on both sides of the river. They kept flicking on and off. It made me realize there was more than a dozen people out there. It was terrifying, but I was fortunate to be going with the flow of the river and not against it. I eventually was lucky enough to outrun them. Eventually, the flickering of the lights was way behind me. I got to my dock and tried to load my boat on my truck so I could leave. I was creeped out the entire time. I kept expecting someone to jump out at me, or something like that. I kept looking around, seeing if there was more flickering lights. I didn't see any as I got into the truck and went off toward home. I didn't feel comfortable until I was back on the main road. I often still fished in that area, but I always left before it got dark. I have no idea what was going on. Number 3. The electric chair. We've been watching it all day, creeping in and out of the south, and knew by the color that it was going to be a good one. The front, a solid black line of clouds, just visible on the horizon, had gradually increased in length and breadth as the day wore on, until by noon it stretched and covered the entire southern quadrant from east to west. At first, the air was hot and sultry, a typical summer day in Nichols, a small farming community in East Iowa, a perfect weekend for beer, barbecue, reefer, and frisbee. But then, it suddenly became extremely hot and dry because of the town's proximity to the Wapsipinicon, Cedar, and Mississippi rivers. The party that weekend was at Hazen's farm, about 3 miles south of Mary and Craig's, on what was left of Grandfather Nichols' 10,000-acre farmstead. Chris and his younger brother Craig owned and farmed the last 1,000 acres, corn, soybeans, wheat, and alfalfa. They also raised livestock, chickens, geese, ducks, pigs, and cattle. By noon, everyone was there. My brother Rick came out from Des Moines. Denny, or Denzel, Hazen, and his girlfriend Kathy lived there. Kenny Chown and his girlfriend Karen had Kevin's house in Nichols. The Mills brothers, Mike and Tim, had their parents' house in Nichols too. Dan Fridley, the best third baseman I knew, still lived there with his parents on the outskirts of town. Craig and my sister Mary, nee Mann, and I lived on Mary and Craig's farm about 3 miles north. Chris Meacham and Chris's wife Dee lived in a trailer near there. Tom Crowley and my eldest sister Karen, nee Mann, drove in from Lone Tree, about 7 miles west of Nichols. My brother Bob and sister-in-law Nita, and my nephew and niece Bobby and Amy, drove down from West Liberty, Iowa, about 30 miles north. And a smattering of the usual local yokels, everybody knew and were always welcome, because like us, they were ready, willing, and able to help out and have fun play some volleyball and frisbee, drink some keg beer, liquor, and smoke some homegrown and chow down on some deep pit pork the Mills brothers had hunted and shot one of the river alts of the estuary islands out along the Mississippi River the week before. The pigs were wild, mean as hell, and dangerous. They got 2-year-olds. Denny mentioned for me to accompany him to the windmill that was in the middle of the property. The rungs on the ladder were welded and the platform was relatively stable, so each climbed his way up the 27 feet to the top to get an eagle-eye view of the oncoming storm. We'd seen enough fronts before, but what made this one different was the color. It was completely black. No detail, no intermixed lighter shades of gray. Just solid black. It was weird. So we shared a doobie, looking out over the farm and fields to the south with Nichols, the town Craig, and Chris's grandfather was named after. To the east, and to the north and west, nothing but thousands of acres of farmland. Midsummer in eastern Iowa meant the corn was 6 feet tall. The soybean blossoms were swarming with wild honeybees. The wheat swirled like waves on an ocean current, and the alfalfa had a smell like sweet oak grass on a hot summer day. All were at peak, and the fecund breezes made it all tumultuously exotic. As the front got closer, I noticed the breezes had stopped. There was almost no smell and no insects. Even the swarms of starling and bank swallows that would usually show up just before sundown were nowhere in sight. It was as if everything was in a state of suspended animation, waiting. But for what? Sliding down the ladder, one after the other, we shed our rust-covered leather gloves and filled a couple of 16-ounce plastic cups with PBR and downed them like water and filled 2 more. Mike was passing around the WT 101 and a big bamboo blunt, and in seconds we were all in 7th heaven. "The answer to world peace," Tim toasted. Kevin, donning that illegal smile, who just bought a new Ford F-150, started talking about starting a hauling business. You know, when you think about it, there's always something to haul. Hauling your ass to work, somebody snuck in. And then hauling your ass home again, someone else volunteered. Kevin, not to be outdone, said, "I'd call it Kevin's Hauling." "That's original," Tim said. "And we'll get some business cards that say, Kevin's Hauling. Just holler, and we'll holler." Everyone laughed at that. By 4 p.m., it had become so hot, Denny turned on the sprinklers around the yard, and we played a rather challenging game of volleyball out in the water. It was like we were little kids, playing in the sprinklers again. It was a hoot. Of course, Bobby and Amy took part. We only quit when the mud was so slick we could barely volley anymore. Looking up from a failed dig that slid me all the way under the other team's side of the net, I crouched there panting, laughing, covered in mud, and could just make out the unnaturally black storm front out of the corner of my eye. It had silently encroached upon us in the southwest setting sun. Calling off my other extracurricular yard activities, we decided to move the whole shebang indoors, or at least onto the surrounding porch, where the only thing we would have to deal with would be the wild honeybees that had infiltrated the entire north and west side of the farmhouse. The hive upon hive, decades in the making, would eventually have to be removed, along with the queen, because after all those dynasties of comb building, the north and west sides of the house buckled and collapsed under their own weight about a year later. leaving just the bare studs and joists, looking not unlike the firebombed cities of Hamburg and Dresden after World War II. A lot of us, and a lot of Nichols locals, eventually pitched in and helped rebuild the north and west sides of the farmhouse, including part of the dry, rotted porch and railing. I kinda miss the wild honeybees buzzing just on the other side of the wall, though. By about midnight, most of the locals had gone home, and the rest of us were either sacked out in our campers and tents, in beds or cots, or on couches and chairs. Denny had around the place. The rest of us hardcores were out taking turns, looking through the binoculars or telescopes that some of us had brought, to watch the weirdest weather phenomena any of us had ever seen. Early on there had been lightning, but no discernible thunder. It was like heat lightning, but in different colors. There was white, blue, pink, green, and yellow, all going off intermittently, and at the same time. We watched it slowly engulf the surrounding area and farmhouse, leaving a hole, like the eye of the hurricane straight above us. I was half expecting a close encounter with a mother ship. In that spot, the sky was completely clear. You could even see the stars. Everything else was completely pitch. Even the farm lights in the yard and the surrounding area seemed dimmed and subdued. Then the wind hit, and with it the thunder, and we ran for the house and the porch. I remember looking back one last time at the hole in the clouds just before they closed. After that, it was like being in a room with no light. People were clearing the porch and going inside, and the few that were still passed out were pulled inside. It was like a tidal wave, but of wind instead of water, even though the rain was like a waterfall, and the flashes of lightning were like searchlights, blinding us temporarily while we tried to find the handle to open the screen door. The first strike had left a diffused green tone to the surrounding area and blew the fuses, and with the windows still open, the inside looked like everything had been whipped around as if in a wind tunnel. The flashes of multicolored lightning acted like a strobe, freezing facial images of fear and shock and horror in my retina, and the thunder was like a close-range artillery barrage. The din was so intense, you could feel it in your teeth and jaw. It shook the ground and made your head ache. And by the time we got everything battened down, all the windows closed, and the folks accounted for, we were all soaking wet. But not just from the rain, from the sweat. Looking around at the faces of everyone I knew, and some I didn't, it was as though we'd all been through this before somehow. I watched as the frowns and grimaces turned into smiles and grins. "You were gonna be okay," the faces said. My favorite spot, in the southwest corner of the living room, an overstuffed chair, where I'd watched the little rascals with Denny and Kathy on the morning after, was miraculously unoccupied, so I was just in motion of sitting down when I remembered I hadn't seen my brother Rick for some time. I needed to find out where he was. Just as I got back up and took about 3 steps across the room, the loudest lightning strike of all hit just outside the window and jumped from the outlet behind the chair, arcing across the room to the outlet on the other side, burning a hole right through the back of the chair and the television set. It was a solid blue bolt that shone on everyone's face and lasted for 1 full second. Mike, Denny, my brother Rick, Tim, and Kathy all came over to me asking if I was okay, and smiling and grinning and hugging me while saying, "Man, your timing couldn't have been more perfect." I had to play it over and over in my head before I finally understood how lucky or blessed I was. There were other incidents that happened in and around that farmhouse over the years, but that's another story. After that, the storm continued its prowl around the farmhouse for about another hour before it moved further north. The next morning, about 2 hours later, the sun was out and I could just make out the black cloud further north disappearing on the horizon. I got up with Denzel and together we scoped the yard and surrounding area at the carnage and were amazed that the barn and the outbuildings were not the worse for wear. Even the windmill was still intact. The volleyball net and poles, however, were goners. Some of the furniture left out was soaked. Craig had gotten his speaker system inside before the rain hit, so we still had our sounds. And the kegs? Pristine, cold, and delicious, especially the Andecker. The beer never tasted better, and the pork to die for. Almost. Hey y'all, Killer Orange Cat here. If you like this video, please let me know by hitting the like button. If you're not already subscribed to Killer Orange Cat, please feel free to click the subscribe button and bell below, or click the icon of Ichigo the cat that will appear at the end of this closing. Leave me a comment, and share this video with someone you think might enjoy it. If you have an original story you'd like narrated on Killer Orange Cat, please email it to the address included in the description. But most importantly, don't forget to make sure to check in your closet and check under your bed, because you never know where a Killer Orange Cat might be hiding. Good night.